I know this is a couple of days old, but bear with me. I can't do it all on my own. And by the way, if you fancy helping out with anything, then give me an email, slipknotpharrington@gmail.com. I don't check it very often, but if you want to help out in any way, I want to try and get to these news stories as they drop. But it's just impossible on your own. Anyway, here we go. Barclays handed biggest bank fine in UK history over brazen currency rigging. Barclays has been handed the biggest UK bank fine in history as 6 banks were ordered to pay $6 billion over manipulating the foreign exchange markets. The Financial Conduct Authority ordered Barclays to pay £284.4 million as part of the British bank's £1.5 billion settlement with a city watchdog and 4 US regulators. Royal Bank of Scotland, JP Morgan, USB, Citigroup and Bank of America were also fined by the Federal Reserve, while all but Bank of America were forced to plead guilty to criminal charges and penalised by the US Department of Justice. Regulators detailed how traders of the banks, referring to themselves with names such as the Cartel, colluded to rig euro-dollar currency benchmarks, profiting from the expense of customers. The bankers attempted to manipulate vital benchmarks used by companies around the world as a peg for foreign exchange transactions in the $5.3 trillion a day market. One Barclays trader wrote in electronic chats, "If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying." These banks, when is enough gonna be enough? It said in the article there, they pled guilty to criminal charges. Apparently these shysters were still fixing the currency exchange rate in 2014, so having been fined because of their fraudulent LIBOR activities, they were still manipulating financial markets for their own ends after the LIBOR scandal. It appears that almost everywhere you look in the financial industry, there is corruption, there is fraud. But what happens? Nothing. You manipulate interest rates to make you and the banks billions and yourself millions, and if you get caught, the bank has to pay a few $100 million in fines. The net result is the bank and its fraudulent banksters are billions to the good. They don't care. They see a fine for getting caught for their criminal activity as a hazard of the job. It's an utter disgrace. The actions of the bankers is appalling, totally unacceptable and criminal. They should be in jail. It affects all of us and how much we have to pay. They are stealing from us to line their own pockets by billions, literally, but no one goes to jail. Billions in fines, hundreds of millions in bonuses, admitted fraudulent activity, and still no one goes to jail. What has a banker got to do to go to bloody jail? Put a quick search in Google and I found this article from the Hull Daily Mail. This guy of a certain road in West Hull was jailed for 16 weeks for stealing washing powder and deodorant from various shops. So this poor guy gets 4 months in jail for stealing some washing powder and deodorant, but bankers steal billions, literally, and no one really gets into trouble, let alone go to bloody jail. But get this, now I don't know who this guy is, but I bet his story goes something like this, just like millions of others around the country. Because the banks recklessly gambled and manipulated the markets for their own ends and for their own selfish bonuses, the banking system collapsed, causing the government to have to bail out the banks to the tune of over £1 trillion. The government then had to introduce austerity to cut costs so that they could start paying back the money owed by the government for bailing out the banks who collapsed because the banks gambled and lost. This guy could well have been made redundant by a company who had to lay people off because the company he worked for had to downsize because the economy was shrinking, because the banks who did all they could to line their own pockets by cheating and committing fraud weren't lending because the same bankers collapsed the system with their greed. This guy would then have to go on benefits because so many companies had closed and he just couldn't find work. He may well have had his benefits sanctioned and lost them, which means the only way for him to survive is to steal. He gets caught, he goes to jail. But the bankers, who wear £1,000 suits and who are responsible for the financial collapse, carry on as if nothing had happened, being paid hundred millions in bonuses despite losing billions. This is where our so-called economic recovery has come from. The 100 billion that's been paid in banker bonuses to the bankers since the financial collapse that they caused and that's cost everybody else. But what shows us that our government has absolutely no interest whatsoever in stopping the bank's fraudulent practices or interfering in any way how the banks are run is the government's handling of Royal Bank of Scotland. Even though the taxpayer still owns 80 to 82% of RBS, who have been heavily fined for legally manipulating the currency market as well, the government couldn't care less about the fact that the taxpayer bailed them out to the tune of £46 billion. Despite losing £50 billion in 7 straight years of losses, the government has still allowed RBS to pay hundreds of millions in bonuses to its staff. More proof, if ever we needed it, that this government and Labour before them are not going to change the way bankers work for anybody. Why would the Conservatives? 50% of their funding comes from these very bankers. They will sanction people's benefits for being late for an appointment, but you lose 50 billion having been bailed out by the tune of 46 billion, and you get hundreds of millions in bonuses as a reward. In 2014, despite RBS losing another 3.5 billion in that year alone, the bank handed over bonuses totaling 421 million, including 72 employees that received over £1 million that year. The banking system is sick, it's corrupt, it's fraudulent, it's parasitical. It must be broken up. The high street banks must be broken down to smaller entities. How on earth can we sanction people's benefits for being late for an appointment, meaning they literally have nothing, but reward such obvious banking failure with hundreds of millions? What costs us more, paying hundreds of millions in banker bonuses for multi tens of billions losses, or somebody who's claiming a little bit more benefit than what they should do? The banking losses outweigh the benefit losses by hundreds of millions of times. It's utterly ridiculous. It's almost like this government are ethnically cleansing the poor. In this so-called sensible, civilised society, this is completely insane and shows that a sensible, civilised society we certainly aren't. But like most things, you don't see any action against the banks. You don't see people gluing pieces of paper on the front of the bank windows with scum on them till they can't get them off. You don't see people protesting them. There was a banker bonus protest a few years ago led by Billy Bragg, bless him, but now it's just accepted that bankers get paid billions and that's it. No wonder they're now saying that the UK is the most unequal society in the Western world. This isn't something to celebrate, and it will eventually lead to riots, because when people have nothing left to lose, they lose it, and bankers will be targeted. Mark my words.